Fox News Podcasts presents the Bret Baier Podcast with Fox News Chief Political Anchor Bret Baier.
As 2024 comes to a close, so does an historic election year. And before we look ahead to President-elect Trump returning to the White House in 2025, we're taking a look back at the top 5 interviews of the year from the Bret Baier Podcast, starting with my conversation with executive editor and anchor of the story, Martha McCallum, who joined me live from Des Moines all the way back in January as we prepared for the Iowa caucuses.
On Monday night, we held a town hall with former South Carolina Governor and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. On Tuesday night, we'll speak with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And on Wednesday evening, we hear from the frontrunner, former President Donald Trump. I mean, Martha, it is a final push to get their closing arguments.
That's what makes it so exciting to do this week, because you see the focus that comes after Labor Day in September. Then you see the push that comes after the holidays, and that's the zone that we're in right now. And we know from speaking to Nikki Haley last night and talking to voters around that a lot of them are undecided at this point. You look at the polls, clearly the former president has a huge lead. But what happens when they walk into the room and start actually caucusing? So that's why Iowa is so much fun to watch. And this year is particularly dramatic, I think.
Yeah, and if somebody comes out of here with a boost that could possibly propel them to be close enough in New Hampshire to make it a race, then it raises questions about whether it gets down to a one-on-one situation.
And that's clearly what Nikki Haley and her team are hoping, that she comes out of here with enough strength and potentially gives the former president a real run for his money in New Hampshire. We see those polls tightening there. Obviously, a lot on the line for Governor Ron DeSantis in Iowa. He has put all of his time and efforts into this state, and it's the one clear place where he was expected to do very well. So what changes after these few nights and the caucus results on Monday is the story we'll be following in the weeks to come, Bret.
And the former president really hasn't taken too many questions, direct questions in this process. He's held a number of rallies here. But to be able for Iowa citizens to ask him, the leader of the Republican nomination so far, specific questions on issues they care about is a big deal.
Yeah, and I think that especially for people who are considering one of the other two, to have the opportunity to talk to the former president. And we have to see if he really articulates a clear vision for them for the future. We've seen him spend a lot of time talking about these lawsuits that he's in the middle of. But from what we see, people are mostly interested in talking about things that are happening after 2024 and what it's going to mean for them personally. So we'll see if he focuses on that tomorrow night.
Then in February, as we marked 2 years since Russia invaded Ukraine, I sat down with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy near the front lines in Ukraine. We discussed the state of war, a war that will continue into the new year. Mr. President, thank you for the time.
Thank
Just
you.
a few kilometers from the front lines, we've been hearing artillery volleys back and forth all morning. And, we sat here and thought 2 years. In the first days when Russia invaded, many experts thought Kyiv was going to go down in 2 weeks. Here we are 2 years sitting right near the front lines. As you make an effort to get support around the world, where do you see this war right now?
Thank you so much, Bret. First of all, thank you, your team, that you came here. It's very important for me. Like I said before we started, that's important for me, the United States, to see different war in the capital and here closer to front line. So first of all, we are here, and it's very important because of the first days when Russia said that they will occupy us. We've been in the capital, and their troops and soldiers been around, and a lot of our territories, houses been occupied. Now we are here, we are fighting 2 years ago. Half of those territory we deoccupied it. And of course, first of all, this resilience and strongness of our warriors, heroes, and our people, and of course, support. Big military support, political support of our partners, United States and EU partners. Now, I think challenging period, another page of the war.
You said you recaptured 55% of the captured territory, but Russia's still controlling 20% on these lines here, and it hasn't moved that much in the past year. So is it a stalemate?
First of all, it's not a stalemate. Indeed, it's very complicated in the East. There's a lack of certain weapons. They do have air superiority, and they have a superiority in terms of manpower. This is the fact, truly. And therefore, there's the stagnation on this part of the front line. We understand that we need to deblock the air. We need our partners not to forget that it's not a war that is taking place over one day, but 2 years. Only the joint efforts would be able to kind of fight back Russians and to have Russians go to concessions.
Putin has to understand what all of us, what we have to do to push him. He has to understand that all the world needs peace, and all the world will not give him possibility to occupy Ukraine and to destroy it totally, what he really wanted and still wants.
You recently replaced your commanding general, General Zelenskyy, with a new commanding general. You also replaced many top commanders. So what does that mean? Does it mean you're looking for a shift, a new direction?
Well, the sort of reloading, rebooting in the management of the supreme commanders of the armed forces, this was something that we really needed. We're not talking about kind of the rebooting or reloading of the direction of our actions. We're just saying that some of the things were not changing over the recent period of time.
We have to be more quick. That means to lose all the bureaucracy what we have. Otherwise, we will not have any chance. So to be smart technology, more technologically, and of course, quick. Time is money. In our case, it's not money, it's people lives.
For Bret's full interview with President Zelenskyy, you can revisit the original episode from February 22nd, 2024.
We'll continue right after this. Now, as we fast forward to May, amid pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel protests breaking out across college campuses, Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman set himself apart from many of his fellow Democrats by actively speaking out about his support for Israel. I had the chance to sit down with Senator Fetterman to discuss his stance on the Israel-Hamas war and his thoughts about what, at the time, was a presidential rematch between President Biden and former President Trump. Senator John Fetterman joins us now. Senator, thanks for coming in.
It's great to be here, yeah.
The president gave a speech. He was largely credited for being pretty clear in his message. Some of his critics said it was a little late. What did you make of that speech?
I thought it was a great speech, and he's been very supportive about Israel. But I don't agree with him on everything. Like, for example, I was public and I said that I don't think we should be withholding any kind of munitions, and I think we need to send them immediately. You know, of course, Israel is in this kind of a war, and I have no conditions. I never have, and I can't imagine I ever will.
Do you think the U.S. support for Israel, he said today it was ironclad, but if they are slow walking these arms sales, how can you say both things?
Yeah, well, like I said, I do think the president has stood with Israel, but we have disagreed on issues like that, and like that for today, was very popular today. That I said, look, we really need to send them. If there should be any kind of conditions, it should be on Hamas and its enablers and its benefactors.
You've also been outspoken on these college campus protests.
Yeah.
And what do you feel about them when you see them, and does it make you upset? How do you react to them?
Well, it doesn't. It's like, I don't know why they seem to. I'm not even sure what they're really, protesting about. If you ask them, they're not really sure. They can't, and now they're not talking about ceasefires anymore. And now they're talking about divesting and harming Israel on that. It's crazy. And they really just broke the mold yesterday when they had protesters at Auschwitz yesterday, then the Holocaust, the 2 mile walk thing. I mean, like, how much more tasteless and disgusting that could be. They showed up with that. And as I said that it's actually working against peace in Gaza. And Hamas is convinced that they've won the PR war, and they keep seeing all these kinds of protests across the nation on these campuses. And it's not helpful, but it's actually works against peace, I think.
What is your thought about what should be done on these college campuses? Should the police be called in? There have been incidents where, for example, here in Washington, D.C., where they called for help and they turned it down.
Honestly, I was reading I can't call him my former colleague, but Senator Sass from Nebraska. I know he's Florida, and I thought he was right on point on that. It's like, we can have protesters, we can have a space to allow that, but you can't take over. We're not going to listen to or respond to or let the fringe or the kind of the loudest kinds of voices to respond on that. And it's like you can't have damage, you can't spit on cops, you can't be allowed to stop things from happening. And I thought that's exactly how it should be. I mean, it's a very much an American value to protest and free speech, but what you have manifested on the campuses now is not that.
This is one of the outspoken things you talk about. You've also pushed back on your party on immigration. You've also pushed back on a number of different issues on the progressive side. Philadelphia Magazine says, is this the John Fetterman Pennsylvania elected? The one-time oddity, however, unexpectedly finds himself smack in the middle of America's political and cultural mainstream. About the best analogy I can think of for Fetterman is that of an underground band from the 1980s that somehow finds itself scoring hit singles and Grammy nods a decade later, and not because the band changed, because the culture did. So what is it? Did you change in office, or has the party changed?
No, I've always been that way. I mean, my wife was a former dreamer, and immigration, I think, is a superpower of our nation. I think it's helped make our nation very special. But I don't know why it was controversial that we have to have a secured border. And then when you start to examine some of the numbers that are showing up at the border, 270, 300,000 people, and I would put that for perspective for Pennsylvania, that's the size of Pittsburgh a month. And it's like, how can you take care of them? How can you give them an American dream when that? And we need to get a hold of that. And that's why I said that after the deal came through, that I want to have that conversation, and I want to sign on more things as well. And in my primary, Title 42 wasn't controversial. All those kinds of things, it wasn't controversial. Those are the kinds of things to be addressed to that situation. And you can be very pro immigration, but also we need a secure border, and we need to respond to the circumstances.
But do you think you've evolved? You said in December, I'm not a progressive. Then prior to that, in the election, you touted progressive bona fides, and you said progressive movement is here in Pennsylvania, and you've proud to be here with Bernie Sanders. I'm a progressive Democrat. Well, the progressives might not say that. They see you more as a Joe Manchin figure. Is that fair?
Well, that was back in 2016, and I've been saying it for years that label left me in that I don't recognize that at all, and I'm not a Manchin kind of figure. I'm just a regular Democrat that is. I want to be honest, and I don't understand. I haven't really thought anything that I've said is really controversial. Standing and leaning in with our critical ally in Israel, and being very pro-immigration, but also realizing that we have to have a secured border, and protesting and free speech is a very valid American right, but not the way it's manifested its way on the campus.
Well, Senator Fetterman, we appreciate the time. Thanks for coming in live. We'd love to have you back.
No, it's great to be here. Thank you.
For Bret's full interview with Senator Fetterman, you can revisit the original episode from May 9th, 2024.
By the time I sat down with former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley in August, it's an understatement to say some things had changed. Former President Trump was facing off against a new opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris. The former South Carolina governor joined me to explain how she believed the former president could adjust his strategy now that he wasn't facing off against President Biden.
Joining us tonight to talk about the presidential campaign, the situation in the Middle East, former presidential candidate, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. Governor, thanks for being here.
No, it's great to be with you.
You know, when you talk to somebody about that evolution, obviously you're running for president in one and you're endorsing the former president at the RNC in another. How do you explain that, and where do you see it right now?
Well, if I thought Donald Trump and Joe Biden were the best candidates, I wouldn't have run. I ran because I thought I could do a better job. I ran because I really cared about the next generation, what was going to happen, and all of the issues that I talked about on the campaign trail. But we are where we are. I am a voter, too. I have to make a choice. And when I look at the issues and I look at the differences between the two candidates we've been given, there's no question that I want to see Donald Trump win this election, because we can't have a Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. I mean, all you have to do is look at what Kamala Harris has said. She doesn't think illegal immigrants are illegal. She thinks that we should give them free education, free place to live, free health care. Tim Walz thinks socialism is neighborly, and he's gone a step further and thinks we should give them free tuition. They want to raise taxes. You look at everything that's happened with our economy already. We can't afford that. More than anything, from a national security perspective, you can't go to Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who have not had the foreign policy experience, and the experience they do have is that they want to expand the Iran deal and give more money to a terrorist organization that says death to America. There's a lot of differences there. We are where we are. And right now, for me, for my family, for those that I love, and as a voter, I think we need to hope that Donald Trump wins this election.
Yeah, a couple of recent polls have shown this bump, that this enthusiasm that this new ticket has received. Reuters has registered voters at 49-47. With Harris leading, and among young voters, a big shift going that way. NPR, PBS, Marist has it 51-48, and with suburban women, Harris leading significantly. Will you go out and campaign for the former president?
Well, I think the first thing you need to ask is, you know, I said that early on, I said a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris. I was always running against Kamala Harris. Republicans should not be surprised that we are now running against Kamala Harris. It was her all the time. There was no way Joe Biden, in the condition that we saw him, could take on the stresses of a presidential election. So, you know, that was something I believed in then. It's why I constantly referred back to her, because I knew that Kamala Harris was the person that we had. And look, what I'll say is it's not an issue of whether I go out and campaign for Donald Trump. He's decided the way he wants to do this. What I will tell you is the Republican Party needs to make a serious shift here. And the first thing is the Republican Party, Donald Trump, people here at Fox, quit complaining that she's not giving an interview. You don't need an interview from Kamala Harris. I take her at her word. I take her at her word that she wants to raise taxes for households over $100,000, that she wants to add a pharmaceutical tax and a health care tax. I take her at her word that she thinks that illegal immigrants should be able to vote and be given driver's licenses. I take her at her word that she wants to ban fracking and kill a bunch of U.S. jobs. Take her at her word.
Despite the fact that the campaign has pushed back and put out statements and saying that her positions have changed.
She has said this. Now, what Donald Trump needs to do is go out there and campaign every single day, telling the American people exactly what Kamala Harris has said. We are 80-plus days out. We need him to win. But you got to go out and do the work. And the one thing Republicans have to stop doing, quit whining about her. We knew it was going to be her. She's not going to give an interview. They're going to hold out as long as they can. That's their right. They can do it. That doesn't mean we can't talk about what she believes in, and we should be getting out there and doing that. And more than anything, this is not an election for just the MAGA vote. Trust me, Donald Trump has that. Republicans need to be fighting for suburban women, for college-educated, for independents, for moderate Republicans, and conservative Democrats. They want to be asked for that. The Republican Party needs to go out for them. Talk to them. Talk to them about the fact that Americans, the average American homeowner is now 49 years old.
And do you think that's not happening now? Do you think that this campaign is floundering on that point?
I want this campaign to win. But the campaign is not going to win talking about crowd sizes. It's not going to win talking about what race Kamala Harris is. It's not going to win talking about whether she's dumb. It's not. You can't win on those things. The American people are smart. Treat them like they're smart. Look, this is a winnable election, but you need to focus. Who is your target market? Your target market is suburban women, college-educated independents, and conservative Democrats. That's your target market. The target issues are the economy, the fact that Kamala wants to raise taxes, the fact that she's taken money from those that didn't go to college and has given it to those that did, the fact that when Afghanistan fell, the fact that when they lifted sanctions on Iran, the fact that when they, actually said that they would help Israel and then pulled back. Where was Kamala when that happened? She was sitting right next to Joe Biden in the Situation Room. This administration is Kamala Harris's administration. Everything that has happened is hers. So define her on that way. Talk about those issues. Talk about how dangerous it is to expand the Iran deal and get back in it. Talk about how dangerous it would be to do an arms embargo on Israel. Talk about how dangerous it was that Afghanistan fell. And talk about how dangerous it is that you have a presidential candidate and a vice presidential candidate that have never dealt with foreign policy, and their way of dealing with it is we shouldn't treat Russia and China as adversaries. That's what they said.
If former President Trump follows your advice and really hits those different demographics and wins this election, and he asks you to serve in his administration, will you?
Well, I genuinely hope he does that, and I genuinely hope he wins. But no, I'm not interested in serving in the administration. I said that on the campaign. This was never about a position for me. This was never about something else. I ran because I love this country so much. My husband's a combat veteran. I'm the daughter of legal immigrants. I have kids that I worry about as they grow up. It was really in that vein that I ran. But now it's in that vein as a voter that I want to see Donald Trump win, because we can't afford to have a President Kamala Harris. It's so much more progressive than Joe Biden has ever been.
Do you think that the first woman president title carries with it a number of votes that people say, you know what, I'm not sure where she stands on these issues, but she would be the first woman president?
I think women and I think Americans are smarter than that. I think what they want is someone who's going to care about them. They want someone who's focused. They want someone who's going to talk about the status of education right now in this country and that our kids are getting dumber, not smarter. They want someone to talk about home ownership and how hard it is to own a home. They want someone to talk about the fact that prices have gone up 19%. And they can't do anything about it. They want someone to talk about how we're going to prevent war.
Is Donald Trump that someone?
He can be. And I want him to be. But
he's not now.
You don't need to be talking about crowd sizes. You don't need to be going on rants about her not doing an interview. You don't need to talk about, things that don't matter. It's not about her. It's about the American people.
I want to turn to the Middle East. Bibi Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, came and visited, had two separate meetings, one with President Biden, one with Vice President Harris. This is what she said after that meeting.
Israel has a right to defend itself, and how it does so matters. What has happened in Gaza over the past 9 months is devastating. The images of dead children and desperate, hungry people. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent.
It was reported in the Israeli press that the Israeli delegation was taken aback by some of those statements after their meeting. One, what did you think of the dual meeting? And two, where do you think Kamala Harris stands, Vice President Harris stands on Israel policy?
Take Kamala Harris at her word. She has made it very clear. When we were having campus protests, she was silent. When we were talking about Israel, she was always taking the side of the Palestinians and Gaza. She has made it very clear that she's an Iran sympathizer. She wants to expand the Iran deal. She wants to work with them. take her at her word. But let me tell you something. She wants to talk about the images. Let me tell you the images. I was in Israel on a solidarity meeting with all of their elected officials to let them know that what they're seeing on college campuses is not America, and that's not how Americans feel. I went into those kibbutz. I went into that concert festival site. The bodies that were burned, the kids that were killed, all that happened. Bret, it didn't just happen from 3,000 Hamas members who came at 6:40 in the morning and did this. It also happened from thousands of Palestinians that joined them. And they went into those areas and looted and killed and helped, and in many cases took Israeli or American hostages and sold them to Hamas. So when you look at Israel and what they're doing, they're trying to make sure that Hamas, that said they're going to do it again, that Hamas never does it again. They can't trust Palestinians because Palestinians joined with Hamas to do it. And Kamala Harris needs to understand, don't sit there and talk about the images of those children. Hamas is sitting there and putting their compound areas in schools. They're doing it in areas where they know if Israel hits, they can say, oh, look, they hit a school, they hit a hospital. Well, guess what? Hamas leadership is in that school and in that hospital.
Governor Haley, Ambassador Haley, thank you very much for the time.
It's always fun. Thank you.
For Bret's full interview with former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, you can revisit the original episode from August 15th, 2024.
We'll hear more after this. Finally, we round out the list with an October interview that many of you may remember. My exclusive sit-down with Vice President Kamala Harris just weeks before Election Day. Madam Vice President, thank you for the time.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Bret.
You know, voters tell pollsters all over the country and here in Pennsylvania that immigration is one of the key issues that they're looking at this election, and specifically the influx of illegal immigrants from more than 150 countries. How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you,
now,
just a number, do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Bret, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have
it's a rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the CHIPS and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please?
But
you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
and
they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising,
okay,
and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
We recognized from day one that, to the point of this being your first question, it is a priority for us as a nation and for the American people. And our focus has been on fixing a problem. And from day one, then, we have done a number of things, including to address our asylum system and put more resources, getting more judges, what we needed to do to tighten up penalties and increase penalties for illegal crossings, what we needed to do to deal with points of entry between border entry points. That's the work we did, and we worked on supporting what was a bipartisan effort, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Congress, to actually strengthen the border. That border bill would have put 1,500 more border agents at the border, which is why I believe the Border Patrol agents supported the bill. It would have allowed us to stem the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States, which is a scourge affecting people of every background, every geographic location in our country, killing people. It would have allowed us to put more resources into prosecuting transnational criminal organizations, which I have done as the Attorney General, former Attorney General of a border state.
Madam Vice President, a couple of things.
Prosecuted trafficking of drugs, guns, and human beings. And Donald Trump, but let me just finish.
Six Democrats voted against that bill.
Learned about that bill and told them to kill it because he preferred to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And in this election, this is rightly a discussion that the American people want to have. And what they want are solutions, and they want a president of the United States who's not playing political games with the issue,
I hear you,
but actually is focused on fixing it.
6 Democrats voted against that bill. It would have allowed 1.8 million illegal immigrants into the country a year. A lot of conservatives had a problem with it. These are the 6 Democrats. But more importantly, back to the original premise, Jocelyn Nungary, Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, they are young women who were brutally assaulted and killed by some of the men who were released at the beginning of the administration, well before a negotiated bipartisan bill. Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday, campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed. So if it wouldn't have happened, this is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe
Bret,
those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There is no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support for the folks who are working around the clock trying to hold it all together.
Madam Vice President.
To ensure that no future harm would occur. And this election in 20 days will determine whether we have a president of the United States who actually cares more about fixing a problem, even if it is not to their political advantage in an election, because there was a solution, Bret.
Madam Vice President, it was a policy decision in the early part of your administration. I will let one of the mothers talk about it. Take a listen.
Because of the Biden-Harris administration open border policies catch and release, they were enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program. This meant that they were released into the United States. It was not even a full 3 weeks later that they would take my daughter, Jocelyn Nungary's life. I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early days. So do you owe them an apology is what I'm saying.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I am so sorry for her loss. Sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions. Let's talk about that as well.
But do you want to answer
in all fairness, I told you, I feel awful for what she and her family have experienced.
During that time, you said repeatedly that the border was secure. When in your mind did it start becoming a crisis?
I think we've had a broken immigration system transcending, by the way, Donald Trump's administration, even before. Let's all be honest about that. I have no pride in saying that this is a perfect immigration system. I've been clear, I think we all are, that it needs to be fixed. We need more. I was just down at the border talking with border agents, and they will tell you, and I'm sure you probably, I know you investigate and you are a serious journalist, they will tell you, we need more judges. We need to process those cases faster. We need the support for those cases that should be prosecuted. They need more resources, and Congress ultimately is the only place that's going to get fixed, Bret.
Well,
that's how this system works.
That's the premise of this question. There were 90-plus executive orders that were rescinded in the first days. Many of those were Trump border policies. I'm not going to stay here because there's other things to talk about, but you frequently talked to the Border Patrol Union for support of that bipartisan bill, and they did. They supported it. But they also just endorsed Donald Trump and said, you've been, quote, a failure with border security. Why do you think they said that?
I think they're frustrated, and I get it. They want support. They want support, and that's what that border security bill would have done. These guys down at the border, these men and women, they're working hard. They're working around the clock. I get it.
For Bret's full interview with Vice President Kamala Harris, you can revisit the original episode from October 16th, 2024.
I want to thank you for joining me on the Bret Baier podcast this year as we lived through history, real time. I look forward to covering what will likely be another historic year in 2025. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.